raised a Jewish kid in Skokie. I'm really not a car guy, which begs the question, what am I even doing here on stage tonight? I got my first car when I was in high school. Went to Niles West. Go Indians. It was a 76 Monte Carlo. Big beater, a big 76 blue Monte Carlo, seemingly indestructible. I think my parents' rationale for buying me the car was that it could withstand the beatings that my dumb buddies and I would inflict on it weekend after weekend. And when I first got the car, I couldn't tell you anything about the mechanical aspects of it. I couldn't tell you what was under the hood or what kind of tires were on the car. I couldn't tell you how many miles were on the car when I first got it. But I can tell you about the tape deck. Cassettes.
Yeah, maybe.
Tapes.
Oh, nice.
When you look at a cassette today, the first thing you think is, really? These were the worst. The sound was terrible. These were not built to last. You had a year tops on these things. And yet, these were the only way to make mixes for your friends, for yourself, and in the case of me, for my car. Now, when I went home from high school every day, I went up to my room after dinner, and I would hole up in my room. And my room, let's be clear, was like the Batcave. Blinds drawn, maybe one light on in the corner, and I would perch myself in front of the Panasonic tape deck, and I would sit there for hours, grabbing records off the shelf, CDs, formatting music, specifically for my trips to and from. Now, it probably bears mentioning at this point, I was a music nerd in high school. But not in the way that indie kids are music nerds today. Oh, these kids today. When I was in high school, we didn't have what indie kids have today, that ironic appreciation of classic rock. We had respect for the forefathers of rock and roll. AC/DC wasn't AC/DC, they were AC/DC. Rush. It wasn't just Rush, they were quite simply the most technically proficient and amazing band in the history of rock and roll. When I got in the car, before I'd crank the keys in the ignition, I'd reach over to the glove box. And in that glove box, I had a stack of Maxell tapes. And each one, as I mentioned, had a specific purpose depending on where I was going. If I was going to visit my grandparents, I can't even explain why I had this to this day, but I had a mix of like 70s art rock songs I'd play. So we're talking Peter Gabriel era Genesis, like In the Colony of Slippermen or something. Or David Bowie, oh my God, David Bowie, the Diamond Dogs album. That 3-song cycle, the troika, the triumvirate, Sweet Thing Candidate, Sweet Thing Reprise. Amazing. And maybe I'd mix things up by putting a song by UK in there. Does anybody even know who UK is?
John White, right?
Yeah, John, they had an electric fiddle. That's all you need to know. Now, if I was with my dumb buddies, we had to go loud, right? Iron Maiden, the Peace of Mind album, Number of the Beast, Run to the Hills, The Trooper, Die With Your Boots On. That's what we wanted to listen to. Music like Maiden, Priest, Sabbath. That's what you want to hear when you're driving up and down the mean streets of Skokie. Or at least main streets in Skokie. Crawford, Skokie Boulevard, then back to Crawford, then back to Skokie Boulevard. Now, if I had my parents in the car, maybe it's the future radio guy in me, I always would play to the audience. I would always play to my parents' sense of nostalgia. So if my dad was sitting next to me, I'd say, gee, Dad, it sure is great to be driving you for a change. Would you like to hear some music? Sure, son. And then I'd whip out what I thought was the perfect mix of Rolling Stones songs. I'd start in with Jigsaw Puzzle, I'd go right to She's a Rainbow, then I'd hit with Live With Me, and then I'd bring it back to the modern day, like something from Tattoo You. Keith Richards, You Can't Go Wrong with Little TNA. Now understand, the tape deck meant freedom. So by extension, the car was freedom. When I was behind the wheel, I was in charge. It was my show, it was my world to command. Now if I was picking up a girl, or a group of girls, which was, what's the right word? Rare. I had to have the right music ready to go. And my friends, they had it all figured out, man. They'd have the Avalon album by Roxy Music loaded. Yeah. Great album, right? And Brian Ferry, he's like the Sean Connery of rock and roll. He's smooth, the music is sensuous, it's amazing stuff. I just couldn't be that obvious. I love Brian Ferry, so if I were to make a tape, if I knew girls were coming in the car, I would play something by Brian, or I'd include something by Brian Ferry, but it wouldn't be obvious. It would be something like, Is Your Love Strong Enough? Because that was a B-side. You couldn't get that song on an album. If you wanted that, you had to go to Record City on Oakton Street, buy the 12-inch with the picture from Legend, the movie that it was from. It was a soundtrack song. In hindsight, maybe one of the reasons girls weren't frequent guests in my car is because my idea of cool involved a song that was from a Tom Cruise movie about fairy princesses and unicorns. Let's fast forward to today. When I leave Shubas tonight, when I walk out that door, I'm going to get into my '98 Toyota Corolla. I don't know how many miles are on the car. I know it's a lot. I don't know what kind of tires I have, even though I bought new tires from Firestone 2 months ago. But I do know how I'm going to get music into my ears in the car. I'm going to grab my iPod, I'm going to plug it into the iTrip, I'm going to plug the iTrip into the cigarette adapter under the stereo. I'm going to turn the stereo to 106.9, which is how I receive the waves from the iTrip. And just because it's tonight and because it's in the moment, I'm going to listen to Is Your Love Strong Enough by Brian Ferry. Thank you for coming.